Welcome!
My friends and I were huge fans of Resident Evil growing up, still are to this day. I own multiple versions of pretty much all the games across multiple consoles, both physical and digital. And even though I had to sell some of them growing up, I pretty much rebought all the heavy hitters. I've played through all the games multiple times, collected the strategy guides, the art books, the steel books, pretty much anything I could get my hands on. I enjoy the classics with the fixed camera angles and the tank controls, the amazing remakes, as well as the newer first-person entries. The gun games can be a lot of fun, and while there are some unimpressive entries in the franchise, Resident Evil is one of my all-time favorite gaming franchises. So I thought it'd be great to have a dedicated Resident Evil collection wheel on my home arcade. With the help of Melonhead and Survivor's amazing theme collection over on the hyperspinfe.com website, I'll put the links in the description below. If you download their themes, make sure you give them a thumbs up. Some theme creation of my own, and some fun nostalgic conversations with my best friend growing up who took turns with me driving down this survival horror road before we even knew what survival horror was. He's been along for the entire journey, the ups, the downs, the fan mods, and the created games. Thanks, Kevin. This is our ultimate Resident Evil collection wheel. Every game, every theme, every logo, every video. Curated by us, a museum to the Resident Evil franchise. Sit back and enjoy.
Resident Evil.
First up is the main wheel theme for the overall Resident Evil collection. I have this set up in my Arcade 1 Hyperspin build, so each category on the main wheel needs to have a logo, theme, and video, all of which are included in this bundle from Melonhead and Survivor. I like their choice of artwork focusing on the 20th anniversary poster, along with various clips from the game. I even added the classic Resident Evil phrase as you click into the wheel.
Resident Evil.
First up is the original PlayStation 1 release in 1996 of Resident Evil, so if you're making your own wheel at home, you should have this link to the PlayStation 1 release. Melonhead included the database for Rocket Launcher Hyperspin builds, and the games are sorted by release date, which I actually like, so I kept it, but did add a few tweaks of my own, including adding any fan-made and modded games at the end as extras. This theme is part of the downloadable bundle and features the two main playable characters in Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine as their design illustrations used to promote the game in video game magazines and advertisements. As I flip through the wheel, note the custom umbrella pointer on the far right that adds that extra Resident Evil flavor. Next up is Resident Evil Director's Cut, which is in part released because of the Resident Evil 2 delay. More on that later. It has the entire first game, as well as a new arranged mode where items and enemies were moved to alternate locations, providing a fresh experience for veteran players. It also added new default outfits and a beginner's mode. However, we never did get that promised uncensored opening FMV video. If you add it to your wheel, add the PlayStation 1 version, preferably the DualShock edition, and enjoy the theme. Next up is Resident Evil 2, which originally released on 2 discs on PlayStation 1. So Melonhead and Survivor's download pack includes some attention to detail as there's 2 separate logos, noting if it's Leon's Disc 1 or Claire's Disc 2. And there's also 2 different themes included, one for Leon where he's shown front and center and Claire's in the background, and then for Claire's Disc 2, she's front and center and Leon's in the background. These are great subtle but important touches, as which order you play the game affects not only the story, the characters you interact with, the locations you go, but also the ending. So toss in Leon's Disc 1, then Claire's Disc 2, you're going to get one story and one ending. But if you would have started with Claire's Disc 2 and then proceeded to Leon's Disc 1, you're going to get a different story and a different ending. It's worth going out of your way to experience everything Resident Evil 2 has to offer. There's a lot of unlockables and a lot of different paths you can take. Even though Resident Evil 2 released on PC, Nintendo 64, GameCube, and Dreamcast, I decided to link the PlayStation 1 version since that's the version I played the most growing up, and it also keeps the controls similar for these first few entries in the Resident Evil franchise as they're all PlayStation 1 controls. Resident Evil 3 Nemesis is up next, and it was the last mainline title to release on the Sony PlayStation 1. The theme here features Jill Valentine in her new outfit, along with the Nemesis, a relentless monster that hunts you down throughout the game. This game is part Resident Evil 2 prequel and part Resident Evil 2 sequel. There are still 2 playable characters, however it's in 1 playthrough instead of 2. There's multiple endings and unlockables. Resident Evil 3 released on PC, Dreamcast, and GameCube. However, I have the PlayStation 1 version linked to keep things consistent in the original trilogy, all with PlayStation 1 controls. Next up is our first spin-off game, Resident Evil Survivor, a light gun game in Japan and Europe, but that compatibility was removed for the North American release. Thankfully, it's been added back in on my Arcade One, so I have this linked to my Gun Games wheel, which utilizes the PlayStation 1 version of the game. The game is cumbersome to play, however, as it is an off-rails gun game, which means you move your character in first person throughout the environment with the controller, and then when you draw your weapon, you go into gun mode where you can fire your light gun. So while the game isn't great, it needs to be here as it's the first Resident Evil spin-off game, as well as the first Resident Evil light gun game. And before we move on, I gotta mention I really enjoy the theme as it uses the box art from the PlayStation 1 game. Next up is Resident Evil Code Veronica, or in this case, Code Veronica X. This was our first big discussion. Do we include both Code Veronica, the original Dreamcast release, as well as Code Veronica X, which released a year later on Sony PlayStation 2, with added cutscenes, including more story details and more of Albert Wesker? Kevin and I both agreed the games are very similar, and Code Veronica X had the additional content, so we really only needed to include one version, and with the theme being Code Veronica X artwork from the box art, we decided to go with Code Veronica X. I currently have the PlayStation 2 version linked, but when the Arcade One 40TB hard drive releases with the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3 content, I'll link the HD version of Code Veronica X, as that was part of the Resident Evil 6 Archives Edition as a digital download. The game has multiple playable characters, a robust campaign, gorgeous visuals, this time with real-time 3D environments and dynamic camera movement instead of the traditional pre-rendered backgrounds. A must-play, and hopefully it gets the full Capcom Resident Evil Remake treatment sooner than later. The next entry is Resident Evil Survivor 2 Code Veronica, another light gun shooter that released in arcades for Sega Naomi, as well as home console for Sony PlayStation 2. I never played the PS2 version, but I did a complete playthrough on the arcade version at Galloping Ghost Arcade. And while it was neat to play on a massive 2-player cabinet, the gun control was not intuitive, as your aiming and movement were tied to the same 3-axis joystick in the shape of a gun. Even though the game is mainly themed around Code Veronica, there are callbacks to Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3. For example, Nemesis will show up if the player runs out of time in a specific area, and he'll hunt you down. If you have both versions available to you, I would link the PlayStation 2 version, as that one originally offered GunCon 2 support on the PlayStation 2. And I have to give Melonhead and Survivor props on this theme, as quality artwork for this game is hard to come by, and they knocked it out of the park with this one. Next up is our first remake, Resident Evil, the remake of the original and still one of the very best remakes ever made. It released in 2002 for the Nintendo GameCube and was a system seller for me, as the quality of graphics were vastly improved and blew me away. The remake also included new gameplay mechanics, revised puzzles, new areas to explore, new story, new boss battles, and so much more. This is the definitive version of the original Resident Evil, a must-play and a top 10 game all time for me. The theme here is fantastic and really shows off a new level of detail and texture added to the characters Jill Valentine and Chris Redfield. The game was ported to Wii and later had a high-definition remaster for PlayStation 3, PlayStation 4, PC, Xbox 360, Xbox One, and eventually Nintendo Switch. Feel free to link to your favorite, but I have the PC version linked. The next entry is Resident Evil Gaiden, the first handheld Resident Evil title, released for Game Boy Color. This is a non-canon entry featuring fan favorites Leon S. Kennedy and Barry Burton as playable characters. The game has a top-down perspective that changes to a first-person combat mode when enemies engage the player, similar to some RPGs. I never really got into this entry, but because this is the first handheld Resident Evil title, it deserves a spot on the list, and the theme looks cool as well. Resident Evil 0 was a prequel to the recently released Resident Evil 1 remake and featured two playable characters, Rebecca Chambers and Billy Cohen, and it also sets the stage for the mansion incident of Resident Evil 1. Resident Evil 0 began development for the Nintendo 64 in 1998 and created a partner swapping system that was supposed to utilize the Nintendo 64 gamepad. However, production later switched and the game eventually released for the Nintendo GameCube. It was bundled with Resident Evil 1 Remake for the Wii and also received an HD remaster for the PlayStation 3, PlayStation 4, PC, Xbox 360, Xbox One, and eventually the Switch. Whichever route you go with Resident Evil 1 Remake, I'd do the same, so I'm going to go with the PC. And this is another fantastic theme showcasing the characters and the background of the train, which is the opening mission. The next entry is another light gun game, Resident Evil Dead Aim, the final installment in the Resident Evil Gun Survivor series. It also features third-person movement throughout the environments, with first-person aiming and firing for the gun gameplay. It released for the Sony PlayStation 2 with a host of new characters, and the story takes place 4 years after the events of Resident Evil 2 on an Umbrella-owned ocean liner. The game is fine overall, but this is another standout theme by the Melonhead and Survivor team. Nice work. Since the Arcade One already has this game pre-configured for the Gun Games, I'm going to link it to the Gun Games wheel, and it's the Sony PlayStation 2 version of the game. Next up is Resident Evil Outbreak, an intriguing new entry that offered cooperative online play where you can play as one of 8 characters, each with their own unique ability, and are tasked to work together to survive one of the 5 episodic storylines. I bought this game to play single player as I didn't have the PlayStation 2 network adapter to play online, so it wasn't nearly as enjoyable as it could have been, and the ridiculously long load times when opening the doors didn't help any. But I do applaud the effort, and I would be interested if they ever attempted a modern remake of the Outbreak games where there's modern graphics, voice chat, online functionality, and reduced loading. Outbreak was only released on PlayStation 2, so that's the version you gotta link. I enjoy the theme here as well, as it shows a few of the playable characters. And no, that cop is not Leon S. Kennedy. Less than a year later, Resident Evil Outbreak File 2 was released, with the same 8 playable characters that you could play single player or take online with multiplayer co-op. It featured 5 new scenarios, including a zoo filled with the undead. The game was more of the same, so if you enjoyed the first game, you'll be right at home with the sequel. The theme here looks great, showcasing all 8 playable characters, and this game was also only released on the Sony PlayStation 2, so link that one if you have it. The next entry, Resident Evil 4, is legendary. It originally released on the Nintendo GameCube and has since been ported everywhere, including to the Wii with motion controls, HD remasters to PC and modern consoles, and even an immersive VR version, which is worth going out of your way to try out. The game abandons tank controls and fixed camera angles, and features a much more dynamic camera system and action-focused gameplay. Resident Evil 4 influenced an evolution of survival horror and third-person genres, with the over-the-shoulder third-person view used in most popular franchises like Gears of War, Dead Space, and The Last of Us. The theme is perfect. It captures Leon S. Kennedy, who's tasked with rescuing Ashley Graham, the president's daughter, from this mysterious village. With so many versions of Resident Evil 4, you can link your favorite, but I'm going to go with the PC version. Resident Evil Deadly Silence is an enhanced port of the original PlayStation 1 Resident Evil 1 to the Nintendo DS. One could argue that this game really isn't necessary for the Resident Evil collection wheel, but I really enjoy this theme that the Melonhead and Survivor team crafted. And the game did add first-person knife battles, a REbirth mode with new touchscreen puzzles, a CPR minigame requiring the player to blow into the microphone to perform CPR on an injured character, a multiplayer mode, and new unlockable costumes. So while it's not necessary, if you do decide to add it, it'll be for the Nintendo DS. Next up is another on-rail shooter, this time for the Nintendo Wii. It's called Resident Evil: The Umbrella Chronicles. This is my all-time favorite Resident Evil light gun game, as it has a very lengthy campaign, plenty of story cutscenes, navigating the events and locations from Resident Evil 0, Resident Evil 1, Resident Evil 3, as well as a brand new scenario focusing on the Umbrella Corporation's downfall. There are 9 playable characters, you can play solo or 2-player local co-op, plenty of unlockable weapons, characters, and missions. The theme here is great. It shows off some of the main playable characters in the game. And if you have the PlayStation 3 HD version, you can link that one. I'll be using the one pre-configured in my Gun Games wheel, which is the Wii version. You could also use Wiimotes and nunchucks if you'd like, as there is a lot of waggle to avoid some attacks in the game. Next up is Resident Evil 5, released to PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, PC, and later ported to PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and Nintendo Switch. The game features a heavy emphasis on action and 2-player co-op gameplay, where one player is Chris Redfield and the other is newcomer Sheva Olimar, which look great in this theme, where they travel to West Africa and all hell breaks loose. The Gold Edition is the version to link, as it includes the co-op revisited Mercenaries mode, costume packs, DLC scenarios, including the amazing Lost in Nightmares and Desperate Escape, and a competitive versus mode. To keep things consistent, I'm going to go with the PC version. The sequel to the Umbrella Chronicles is up next, Resident Evil The Darkside Chronicles. While not quite as good as the first entry, it's a solid on-rail shooter that also released on the Nintendo Wii, and later received the HD remaster on the PlayStation 3. It featured location and events from Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil Code Veronica, and a completely new chapter that can be played solo or two-player local co-op. Yet another excellent theme featuring two of the main playable characters from the game, and you'll want to link whichever game you link for the Umbrella Chronicles. In my case, it's the Wii version that's pre-configured for the Gun Games wheel. Next up is another handheld entry, Resident Evil The Mercenaries 3D, released on the Nintendo 3DS. This is another game you could argue isn't necessary to include in this collection wheel, as it is a bare-bones combination of the Mercenaries minigames from Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil 5, where the player races against time to clear out enemies with a variety of characters on numerous locations from those games. But since this is more of a museum wheel for me, I wanted to include it here, especially since there's a nice theme showing off some of the playable characters. If you include it, you'll want to link the 3DS game. Resident Evil Revelations is another handheld game that released on the Nintendo 3DS. However, this game was much more of a AAA survival horror Resident Evil experience, with a full campaign, story cutscenes, boss fights, exploration, and multiple playable characters. This was a system seller for me, as I bought my 3DS just to play this game. This is a fantastic theme as well, showing off some of the main characters and the ghost ship environment. Well done. And you can link the 3DS version if you want the handheld original, or it has an upscaled HD version for PC and all of the modern consoles. I would go with either the 3DS original or the PC version. Next up is Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City, which is a spin-off title focusing on squad-based third-person shooting gameplay that released on PC, PlayStation 3, and Xbox 360. There are 12 playable characters, 6 versus 6 squads, each with their own unique skills. There's a campaign and online multiplayer modes to enjoy with your friends. And while I'm more of a single-player Resident Evil player, I did buy this game, and I didn't get that much out of it. Although this theme does look amazing, and it does make me want to give it another shot. So if you do want to link this game in your Resident Evil collection wheel, I'd go with the PC version. The next mainline entry is Resident Evil 6, which is a polarizing entry. The game tried to be all things to all people, with various campaigns focusing on survival horror in one, all-out military action in another, and stealth in another one. And while I enjoyed my initial online co-op playthrough with Kevin, the cracks started to reveal themselves with future playthroughs, as there was a level of polish missing that the other mainline entries had. There's a lot of content across the 4 campaigns, mercenary mode, and even DLC multiplayer modes. Resident Evil 6 released on PC, PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, as well as had ports to all the modern consoles. I'm going to link to the PC version, but you can link to whichever is your favorite. While Resident Evil 6 has a lot of rough edges, there is a lot to like as well, and this theme does a terrific job of showing off 6 of the playable characters. Resident Evil 4, 5, and 6 were bringing the Resident Evil franchise more and more into the action genre, but the Revelations games kept pulling it back into the survival horror genre, and Resident Evil Revelations 2 was no exception. Claire Redfield and Barry Burton team up in this episodic game that also includes the returning raid mode from the first Revelations game, with 15 playable characters and almost 200 missions that can be played solo, online, or split-screen local co-op, depending on the platform. Resident Evil Revelations 2 released on PlayStation 3, PlayStation 4, PC, Xbox 360, Xbox One, PlayStation Vita, and the Nintendo Switch. The theme looks fantastic, and I really enjoy the fog effect at the bottom. For Resident Evil Revelations 2, I'm going to link it to the PC version. Next up is Umbrella Corp, a tactical shooter that's a spin-off of the Resident Evil series. However, it didn't even bother to put it in the title. This game likely shouldn't even be on this collection list, especially since I've never played it and I have no intention to ever play it. But the Melonhead and Survivor team did take the time to make this nice theme, so I added it to show it off. Umbrella Corp only released on PlayStation 4 and PC, so I suppose the PC version it is. Let me know in the comments below if you've ever played this game and what you think of it. Resident Evil 7 Biohazard took survival horror and the Resident Evil franchise in a new direction, with its first-person gameplay, a new protagonist, and the bizarre Baker family hunting you down. The new first-person perspective added to the immersion and the intensity, but at first the game felt nothing like Resident Evil. But as the game progressed, it felt more like an evolution of the franchise in a lot of ways. Resident Evil 7 Biohazard released on PC and all of the modern platforms. I would recommend linking the PC Gold Edition, as there's some quality banned footage DLC and story scenarios included. The theme perfectly captures the creepy aspect of the Baker family, and Resident Evil 7 Biohazard was the first VR gaming experience that I had, and it did not disappoint. Next up is the second remake in the franchise, Resident Evil 2 Remake. It still focuses on two separate campaigns starring Leon S. Kennedy and Claire Redfield, but it changed up the gameplay to survival horror third-person shooting and completely reworked from the ground up character models, story, environments, and the visuals. As you can see, the visuals are absolutely stunning in this beautiful theme done by the Melonhead and Survivor team. I love the artwork as it really sets the tone for the game. The original Resident Evil 2 was a masterpiece, and the remake does its legacy justice. It released on PC and all modern platforms, so link to your favorite one. I'm gonna go with the PC to keep things consistent. Capcom delivered back-to-back remakes with Resident Evil 3 Remake, which was equally stunning and continued the survival horror third-person shooting gameplay. The Nemesis brought a new sense of terror as he chases you through certain environments. Overall, I really enjoyed this game as it was a lot of fun to play. However, certain areas and story elements from the original were glossed over, which did make the game shorter, which was a bummer. Still an excellent game, and another visually stunning theme here featuring box art from the game. Nice work. Resident Evil 3 Remake released on PC and modern consoles, so pick your favorite, and again, I'm going to go with the PC version to keep things consistent. Next up is Resident Evil Resistance, which is an online component to Resident Evil 3 Remake that is a 1 vs 4 multiplayer game where 4 survivors, each with unique abilities, compete against a mastermind player who creates traps, enemies, and other hazards to try to prevent the survivors from escaping. I probably wouldn't have included this on my Resident Evil collection wheel, however, there's a fantastic theme here made with some of the survivors and the mastermind lurking in the background, so I just had to add it. It did release for PC, PlayStation 4, and Xbox One, so pick your preference, but I'm gonna go with the PC. Resident Evil Village, also known as Resident Evil 8, is up next, and a direct sequel to Resident Evil 7 Biohazard, and continues on with the first-person survival horror gameplay. Resident Evil Village brought back the attaché case inventory system from Resident Evil 4, and even had some village and castle environments, further adding to the similarities. The game released on PC and modern platforms, so link your favorite. But I would recommend the Gold Edition, as it includes the Winter's Expansion DLC, a new story expansion titled Shadows of Rose, additional characters and stages for the Mercenaries mode, and even a third-person camera mode that allows you to play the entire campaign in third person. I linked the PC version myself, and before I move on, again, nice touch with the theme here. It's inspired by the game's box art. Resident Evil REbirth is a third-person multiplayer shooter that originally was supposed to release with Resident Evil Village, but was delayed. As you can see from this fantastic artwork and the theme, the game features many fan-favorite characters from across the entire series, each with their own skills and weapon loadouts. 2 to 6 players compete in 5-minute death matches, where players can be either human characters or creatures and bioweapons, including Hunters, Nemesis, and even the Super Tyrant. This downloadable game released on PC and modern consoles, and I'm going to go again with the PC version. Next up is the most recent remake in the series, Resident Evil 4 Remake, released in 2023 for PC and modern consoles. Like Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3 remakes, this one is a survival horror third-person shooter with amazing visuals, as you can see from the artwork in this theme. Nice touch with the fire animation as well. Once again, the Gold Edition is the one to get, as it includes the Separate Ways story expansion featuring Ada Wong as the main protagonist, as well as some extra costumes and weapons. Resident Evil 4 was a masterpiece when it originally released on the Nintendo GameCube, and the remake does a great job of recapturing that magic of the original. Plus, it pushes forward the experience for modern audiences. Link your favorite version of the game, but once again, I'm going to go with the PC version. Those are all the official Capcom released Resident Evil games in the series. Next up, I'm going to focus on some long-lost games, fan mods, and even original fan-created games that Kevin and I have stumbled upon over the years and enjoy because we're big fans of the franchise. First up is BioEvil 4, which is a demake of Resident Evil 4 in the style of an 8-bit game. It has tough ghouls and ghosts style gameplay and is perfect for arcade control panel gameplay. I'll show some extended gameplay later in this video. This demake was made by Jaipot Thomas and Awesomes and can be played on PC. I created this theme for the wheel with a screenshot from the game.
Resident Evil.
Next up is Resident Evil Classic REbirth. This is a series of fan mods and patches to the PC ports of the first 3 Resident Evil games that enhance the visuals and sounds and pretty much make them HD ports of the original games. There are many contributors to this project, and I want to thank them all for their efforts, as well as Survivor for this amazing Resident Evil 1 theme. This is also a PC game that you'll want to link. Next up, we have the long-lost Resident Evil 1.5, which is the unofficial name for the scrapped prototype version of Resident Evil 2. It features Leon S. Kennedy and Elza Walker as the main playable characters. I remember seeing screenshots and these illustration artwork of the characters in EGM magazine growing up, and hearing how the game was about 40% complete before being restarted from scratch. Over the years, different unofficial builds popped up on sites like eBay and were purchased and tinkered with, and more recently have been made available unofficially to the public to try out, with the most recent update releasing in January 2025. This theme is from the pack that I downloaded, but I did modify it to include the matching artwork for Elza Walker, as well as a darker background to make the characters pop. A special thank you goes out to everyone involved in helping bring Resident Evil 1.5 to life and keeping the legacy alive. And make sure you link this as a PlayStation 1 game. As the second game in the Resident Evil Classic REbirth series, Resident Evil 2 also benefits from a series of fan mods and patches to the PC port of the game. The HD visuals look great, and thanks again goes out to all the contributors and Survivor for this sharp looking theme. You'll want to link the PC version of the game. Next up is the unexpected Resident Evil 2 Kendo's Cut, which is a fan mod to the PC version of Resident Evil 2, uploaded by REbirth Nemesis 30. The game focuses on Leon S. Kennedy's playthrough of Resident Evil 2, however there's a big change. We finally get to find out what would happen if Robert Kendo, the gun shop owner, survived the gun shop attack and then followed Leon in his descent into darkness. This is a hilarious mod with plenty of clever uses of fan favorite Kendo throughout. I created this theme to honor Kendo and Leon on their journey into madness, and you'll want to link it to the PC version of the game. Next up is the surprising sequel to Resident Evil 2 Kendo's Cut with Resident Evil 2 Kendo's Cut Uncut, which is a fan mod to the PC port of Resident Evil 2, and again uploaded by REbirth Nemesis 30. And this game answers the same question. What if Robert Kendo had survived the gun shop attack, but this time, if he followed Claire Redfield and her descent into darkness? The Kendo appearances and interactions are even more bizarre in this sequel. You'll again want to link it to the PC version of the game, and this time my created theme focuses on Kendo and Claire.
Resident Evil.
The third and final game in the Resident Evil Classic REbirth series is Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, and it also benefits from the series of fan mods and patches to the PC port of the game. The HD visuals again look great, and thanks again to all the contributors and Survivor for this amazing looking theme. You'll want to link this one to the PC version as well, and now you can play all three of the original PlayStation 1 games on PC in HD. Next up is Resident Evil 3.5 Code Madman. This fan-made demo recreates the gameplay from a 2002 TGS early beta trailer for Resident Evil 4 that featured Leon S. Kennedy traversing an airship, battling spirits at one point. The game was scrapped and started over from scratch, numerous times in fact, as one early version of Resident Evil 4 spun off into Devil May Cry. As far as I know, this is the only way to play the version of that early beta Resident Evil 4 trailer, and it's a PC game that you'll have to link on your wheel. I also created this custom theme with the limited artwork that I could find. Capcom released some upscaled HD ports of Resident Evil 4, and some fans were wanting a true HD version of the game. So enter Resident Evil 4 HD Project, where the PC game is completely remastered with enhanced textures, 3D models, menus, cutscenes, pre-rendered videos, lighting, visual effects, and much more. Shout out to Ghost Lost on the Hyperspin FE website for this great theme, and link your PC copy of the game and add these mods for the best HD version of the original Resident Evil 4. Next up is Resident Evil Containment, which is a total conversion mod of Resident Evil 1 by Aidan Watkins. It's a fan mod that includes massive changes to the original environments, new areas, enhanced mechanics, new monsters, new weapons, new puzzles, and a completely original story with brand new cutscenes and fully voiced dialogue. The game originally released in chapters, but is now fully complete and features a prologue and 4 chapters. And if you want to add it to your wheel, it runs as a PC game, so you'll want to link that to your wheel, and I created this theme based on the limited artwork that I could find, so that way I could add it to mine. And while there are even more Resident Evil mods and fan games created, the last one that I'm going to discuss in this video is also from Aidan Watkins, and it's Resident Evil 2 Marvin's Mod Desperate Times, which is a standalone PC mod featuring Resident Evil 2, which tells the story of Marvin Branagh before his final moments. Experience Marvin's story as seen in Resident Evil Outbreak File Number 2. There's dynamic events, new movies, AI partners to assist, new story, along with new ending requirements, routes, items, puzzle solutions, and much more. I linked the PC game to my wheel, and I even created this theme to honor Marvin's last journey through the Raccoon City police station. Most Resident Evil games are best played with a controller, but since I added this Resident Evil collection wheel to my home arcade, Arcade 1, I wanted to show some gameplay of BioEvil 4, a fan-created demo that plays great on your arcade control panel with joystick and buttons. It's very challenging, but worth the effort, as this Resident Evil 4 remake is very well done. Sit back and enjoy. that completes my ultimate Resident Evil collection wheel on my Arcade 1 home arcade. I'll quickly go through the wheel one more time as I close out this video. I want to give a special thank you to Kevin for the fun Resident Evil experiences and conversations that we've had over the years and prepping for this video. Also, a big shout out to Melonhead, Survivor, and Ghost Lost over on the Hyperspin FE website for all of their hard work on the Resident Evil themes and media that I used in this video. And of course, a huge shout out to Capcom for making such an amazing franchise with so many great games. One of my all-time favorite gaming experiences growing up happens to be a Resident Evil story as well, where Kevin and I went to the movie theater looking to rent the Sony PlayStation 1 for the first time and a few games. We had no idea which games were good, so we scanned the box art and the Resident Evil 1 tall box stood out to us. So we rented the game, hooked up the PlayStation at his house, and started to explore the hallways of the Spencer mansion together. We proceeded to jump out of our seats as those dogs crashed through the windows and killed us. We had to start the entire game over as we didn't even get a memory card when we rented the PlayStation. We were instantly hooked anyway though. We played all weekend long, dying, restarting, swapping the controller back and forth, solving puzzles together, taking different routes through the mansion, seeing different character interactions each time, and loving every minute of it. And as we got farther and farther into the game, it got more and more intense, and the sense of dread around every corner was heightened as we knew any wrong move could mean instant death and all that progress would be lost because of that lack of memory card. We had many memorable escapes, close calls, and heartbreaking deaths. It was a memory that I'll always cherish and cemented my love for the Resident Evil franchise. If you have a memory of a Resident Evil game, or if you saw a game in this video that you never heard of and you plan on checking out, let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to hear all about it and strike up a conversation. Maybe you love the fixed camera angles and the tank controls like I do, or maybe you absolutely can't stand them and you hate them. Perhaps you never played a Resident Evil game until the remake's release with the new third-person gameplay. Or perhaps you really enjoyed the co-op and multiplayer portions of the games best. Maybe you're a big fan of the mods and the fan-created games, and I missed out on your favorite one. Let me know, as I'm always looking for an excuse to play more Resident Evil. Share all your thoughts and your memories in the comments down below, and I'll be sure to respond. Thank you for watching the video. Give the video a thumbs up to show your support for all things Resident Evil. And remember to ring that notification bell to stay up to date with all my future video content. And I appreciate all of your support. And remember, we're in the end game now.